You're listening to The Bob Duco Show. Working our way through the news hour, news and politics. All right, let's get to the judge's decision here. Here's basically what happened, okay? As you know, Donald Trump, by executive order, Donald Trump declared a temporary halt on immigration into this country and refugees in this country from 7 specific nations, okay? And these are 7 specific nations that are considered to be the most ISIS compromised. All right, now I want to make sure everybody understands this. These 7 nations, Donald Trump didn't come up with these 7. Right? These 7 are actually the 7 that Barack Obama himself came up with during his administration. They are Iran, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Somalia, Sudan, and Yemen, the most ISIS-infiltrated nations. So Barack Obama came up with that list of 7. Donald Trump just decided to use that list. And so what Trump said was in his executive orders was that if you are an immigrant coming to this country from one of those 7 nations, then you're going to have to wait an extra 90 days because we don't do a good enough job vetting people in this country, and we need to get better at it. So give us 90 days. It's an inconvenience. You'll just have to wait an extra 90 days before coming, and then you will be free to come in this country once we've improved our vetting process. And if you're a refugee wanting to come into this country, for right now, you're going to have to wait an extra 120 days. And then we'll bring refugees into this country. And we'll allow up to 50,000 refugees a year, which is the average amount that's been allowed for the last 15 years since 9/11. I want to remind everybody, people in other countries do not have an American constitutional right to come into this country as an immigrant. People need to realize this, let alone a right to demand you can't make me wait 90 days. But as you know, the liberal left had a field day with this and have tried to make it as though Donald Trump is banning Muslims. And never mind the facts that there's 53 Muslim nations, Muslim majority nations in the world, 53 of them, and this order of Donald Trump's only applies to 7 of them, which means the Muslims from the other 46 Muslim majority nations are free to come into this country as immigrants, and Donald Trump, no executive order is stopping them. But it's still somehow called a, quote, Muslim ban. Well, since the liberal left has made such a big deal out of this, since the mainstream media has been reporting this the way that they have with a lot of dishonesty, you've had groups like the ACLU and CARE and liberal groups that have specifically filed lawsuits in liberal states, liberal Democrat blue states. One of them, of course, is the state of Washington. And they found a judge who, by the way, happens to be a George W. Bush appointed judge, but obviously pretty liberal here. They found a judge who ruled against Donald Trump in this case, saying that there's a temporary restraining order. Now, here's what a lot of the media is not telling you. Before that Washington state judge issued this temporary restraining order, which just does nothing more than temporarily halt Donald Trump's executive order from taking effect until both sides can review this thing and upon appeal and that type of thing. Before that even happened, you had another judge in Boston, Massachusetts, that ruled in favor of Trump's ban, saying, yeah, there's nothing unconstitutional about this. Donald Trump is allowed, as President of the United States, he's allowed to issue an executive order like this. So you have one judge who says he can do that. You have another judge in Washington state who says he might not be able to. Let me put a temporary restraining order on this while we investigate this further. And what's happened in the press is this is being reported as though Donald Trump is stopped by the courts for his illegal, unconstitutional discrimination against Muslims and whatever. That's how this is being treated and being reported. So here's what happened. This Washington judge, between the two, now I want you folks to keep in mind, you got a Washington judge and a Boston judge. They disagree with each other. The Boston judge says Trump can do this. The Washington judge says, no, I don't think he can. Donald Trump could have said to the Washington judge, on you, I'm going with the Boston judge. As far as I'm concerned, the Boston judge gives me a green light. Therefore, I'm going with the Boston judge, and we're going to ignore the Washington judge's order. Trump could have done that, in all fairness, but he chose not to. Trump chose to color within the lines, to play within the rules of protocol, and say, okay, one judge agrees with me, one judge disagrees with me. I'll go ahead and obey the judge who disagreed with me order and go through the normal appeals process. Honestly, folks, I think Trump ought to be getting some credit for that. From all the liberal haters that say that Trump is a wild maniac who ignores the Constitution. Really? Trump actually, the Boston judge gave Trump a way to ignore the Washington judge, but Trump chose not to and said, I'll go through the normal appeals process. And so he appealed this to the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. Why the Ninth? Because Seattle, Washington, where this original judge was from Washington, is part of the Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit covers a bunch of western states. Now, the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, folks, is the most liberal Circuit Court of Appeals in the entire nation. And they're the circuit courts, those are the ones that are right before the U.S. Supreme Court. But the Ninth is the most liberal. It's the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals that several years ago, remember, they ruled under God can't be in the Pledge of Allegiance because that's somehow unconstitutional. That's the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. So here's what the Ninth said. Even though the press is reporting it, like the Ninth has ruled against Donald Trump and supported this earlier Washington judge, that's not actually what's happened, folks. What the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals says is that we're not going to overturn the Washington judge at this point. We're going to wait, and we're going to hear arguments from both sides. We want the ACLU and those groups, we want the anti-Trump people to present their best arguments before us, and then we want the Trump administration to present their best arguments, and then we'll rule on it. So that's all the Ninth has done at this point. Now, I have to say, folks, because judges in this country have become liberal activist judges, it wouldn't surprise me if the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled against Donald Trump. That wouldn't surprise me, although that would really be a shame. But anyway, no matter how the Ninth ultimately rules in this case, it's going to go before the U.S. Supreme Court, because either side is going to appeal it to the U.S. Supreme Court, which then begs the question, what happens with Neil Gorsuch? Because, as you know, Democrats are going to do everything they can to stall getting Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court. Right now, the Supreme Court is what's called a 4-4 split. 4 hardcore liberals, but then you have 4 conservatives that aren't hardcore conservatives. A couple of them are soft and could side with liberals. So if the liberal Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, if the Ninth decides to rule against Donald Trump in this case and say, yeah, we say that your bans are unconstitutional, you don't have the right to do this. If that's what they rule, and Trump appeals this to the U.S. Supreme Court, here's the bad thing. You got 4 liberals that are probably going to go against Donald Trump no matter what he does. And even if all 4 conservatives, including the soft conservatives like Anthony Kennedy and John Roberts, even if they stuck to the conservative side, if Neil Gorsuch isn't on the bench yet as the 5th conservative, it's a 4-4 tie. In a 4-4 tie, the lower court ruling sticks, which means the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court, if they rule against Trump, would stick. And then Trump's temporary ban would be overturned, and there's nothing he could do about it. So this is a little bit of a dilemma for Donald Trump, and this is why everybody's going to be watching very closely to see what the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals does. Now, I have to say, this is what's so troubling about this in the court system. Liberal judges are consistently more and more making political decisions here. All right, folks, presidents of the United States have always had the authority to block immigration from certain areas around the world. Did you know that? For reasons of national security. And guess what? Presidents have done it in the past, Republican and Democrat, with no legal problems. Can I remind you folks of something? Investors Business Daily, just last week, reported this, quote, President Obama himself barred large groups of immigrants from entering the United States at least 6 different times out of national security concerns. In 2011, the Obama administration suspended refugee processing from Iraq for 6 months. Not 120 days, but 6 months, to make sure terrorists weren't exploiting the program. But listen what Investors Business Daily also goes on to say, quote, President Bill Clinton issued immigration bans 6 different times.